Welcome, members of the public, those that are viewing this online. We appreciate your attendance, both internet and in person this morning. This is our regular scheduled Weber County Commission meeting, Tuesday, June 16th. And I'm Commissioner Gage Frohr. To my left is Commissioner Scott Jenkins, and to my right, Commissioner Jim Harvey. We appreciate you being with us this morning. We have a full agenda, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And we're going to start with Pledge of Allegiance given by our own Brian Barron, invocation by Matt Wilson, and then we'll do Thought of the Day by Commissioner Jenkins, and which time we'll go into public comment. So, Brian, do you want to lead us in the pledge? See Matt. Chris, you want to?
He said he's on his way down, but I'm happy to give it if you would.
Go ahead.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful for this day, and we are grateful to join for this commission meeting to discuss the business of the residents of this county and to find ways that we may be able to improve their lives and to serve them. We ask that Thy Spirit will be with us as we go through these matters, that we may be able to make decisions that are in the best interest of the residents of this great county. And we ask for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Commissioner Jenkins.
Thank you. So, last 2 weeks, we've had a spike in COVID cases in the county. We've had, in our Latino population, we've had a severe uptick, and I think it's time that we focus a little here and realize that maybe we're losing our focus a little bit on trying to keep this under control. I feel bad about this because we felt like we were that close to going green, and it just didn't work out. So today my comment would simply be, we need to remain focused. Don't lose our focus. Things are getting good here. We're returning back to normalcy, and we can't lose focus on that because we don't want to have a second wave that ends up being worse. So please, everybody, be aware of what's happening. Keep your social distancing. That's why we're sitting apart here. And let's keep this alive and keep pushing here. We will overcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, great thought. Let's try to be healthy. All right, let's move to public public comments. Anybody would like to address the commission? Now's the time to do it. Thank you. You got somebody standing in for you today, Ralph? Oh, okay. Now I get it. And again, just as a reminder for everybody, we are limiting public comments to 3 minutes. Welcome, Ralph.
Closer? Yeah, hold on, get you closer. Sideways?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I'd just like to remind everyone that we have had a lot of things happen inside the nation. I'm very thankful and grateful for us here in Weber County and Ogden City that we have a relationship that is one that is very conducive to the train of thought for everyone and us to go ahead and look at things for everyone. I'd just like to write all lives matter. The Black Lives Matter movement has been one that has focused on the situation as far as what's going on with people of color, and that being all colors. And that bring attention that we need to look to address ourselves that if all answers that are given as what the status quo has been, there's no room for discussion, or there's no room for thought to grasp for us to move forward in anything. I would appreciate that if you just take the time and be able to look at even what you think to be the norm and what you think to be the acceptable answer, or what you think to be the conclusion to the answer to a problem, that you broaden your mind and you broaden your thought patterns, that you might just think about with an empathetic ear to how it might be perceived different than something that you as normally would come on conclusion. And I just want to say that we have been doing some things here in Weber County that has been beneficial to the train of thought. I'm very thankful for the sheriff and for chief of police and that here they're willing to open their minds and look at things, as well as the officers that's been here. I thank the commission and the city council and the different ones too, but also just to challenge you to all that are here to try to look at the perspective of another person. That's all.
Thank you, Ralph, and we appreciate you being timely with those remarks. Thank you very much. Anybody else?
I'll just take a minute.
Go ahead. You can take 3.
Related to Commissioner's comments on the COVID, I've been involved with some things with
Could you, excuse me, sir, could you please state your name
Jeff Glum,
and your address?
3725 Brinker Avenue. Ogden.
Thank you.
There are some challenges out there with people who actually need to see doctors and those kinds of things beyond what their protocol is. And that's not happening like it needs to. So when we talk about this spacing and this doing all we can and whatever, we need to not only look at the possibility of the COVID, but what is the effect on everything else. It's not just COVID, it's everything else. And if you put COVID and it's the main priority and that's the only thing you're going to focus on, we got a problem. Because everything else matters as well. So there needs to be that balance. And if we tend to go this direction, like we tend to do sometimes, oh, this isn't working, so we swing clear over here to this pendulum. Oh, that isn't working, and then we swing clear over here to this pendulum again. We don't look at the balance. We need to really think about it.
Thank you for those remarks. I can tell you between a number of commission meetings, we understand that this has a lot of moving parts: economic development, mental health. It's the interaction that people have in their day-to-day lives that's now gone away, as well as the health concerns. So I think we understand very clearly that this is not strictly about COVID, but the effects of COVID go far and deep within our community. So thank you. All right, additional public comments. The floor is open. Going once, twice. Thank you very much. Let's go to consent items, Commissioners. F1, request for approval of warrants 2807 through 2822 and number 450106 through 450251, the amount of $1,613,164.03. 2, request for approval of purchase orders in the amount of $124,661.64. 3, request for approval of minutes from the meeting held on June 9, 2020. 4, request for approval of new business licenses. 5, request from the Weber Metro CSI units to surplus various technology equipment. 6, request from the Weber County Fire or Fleet Department to surplus a 2005 Dodge Ram 2500 pickup. 7, request for approval of extensions to pay delinquent taxes on parcels number 131486 and parcel number 013833. The Tax Review Committee unanimously recommended extensions on both parcels. That's our consent items, Commissioners. Action or comments before we go to Lynn for, I'm assuming Lynn's going to do our update.
Do that and then I'll ask him.
Lynn, go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. We had 23 purchase orders totaling $125,000. The largest of these, $28,000 or 23%, went to operations for the relocation of utility poles and computer equipment. $15,000 or 12% went to dispatch 911 for West Safety Solutions maintenance renewal. $15,000 or 12% to the health department for WIC computers and a fridge for immunizations. $12,000 or 10% to Golden Spike, shavings for the stalls and T-shirts for rodeo contestants. We had 162 checks totaling $1.6 million. Largest of these were $635,000 or 39% to the transfer station for disposal fees. $367,000 or 23% were ramp awards to 11 different entities. $130,000 or 8% for the North Ogden Divide project, and those come from Proposition $1. $107,000 or 7% to the jail for a variety of expenses, including culinary, employee health insurance, utilities, equipment maintenance, and related expenses.
Thank you. Questions, Commissioners?
Yeah, the question I have, Lynn, maybe you can help me. On page 2 of this report, there's $34,000 for American Technologies, capital improvements. So normally as you go through these bills, you get to where you recognize them, you know, and you just go right through them. But this one I don't recognize, and I don't understand where it fits into capital improvements. Can you answer that?
So I'll look to, I'll defer to operations.
Mr. Wilkinson.
Up along, they call him.
For a little while. Commissioners, this is for some of the utility work that's been going on here at the Weber Center in preparation for the parking structure to come down. So with Americom, I believe that's what this is. Any questions about that? There will be some other utility bills that you'll see in the future with Comcast, with gas and power companies, but that's what
No,
this is.
I don't have any questions specifically on that. I just couldn't recognize it from the description.
Yeah.
And I know we'll have more
All right.
associated with that. In fact, I was in Scott Park's office the other day, and they were jackhammering outside his wall there. And I was talking to him, and I says, this is going to be a little tough on you. And he says, wow, this is, he says, you didn't expect it to be quite this bad. Well, they're actually right there hammering. I suspect we're going to have 2 or 3 weeks that'll be very uncomfortable to work in this building.
Yes.
I will.
Yeah.
Is that to conclude your
Yes.
questioning?
Thank you.
Commissioner Harvey, any questions or?
No, I appreciate that reminder, Sean, but I figured it had something to do with all the relocation, so thank you.
Thank you. And I just make a comment on item 7, the delinquent tax approval extensions. If you've read through those application extension, the applications, I think that it makes sense that these 2 properties are granted extensions. Obviously, our property tax system is set up to make exceptions or extensions in situations where taxpayers have financial difficulties or other problems. So this is a great example of our property tax system working, and so I'm very much in favor of granting those extensions. Commissioner?
And I don't know to the extent of what this is, but we're being reminded right now that there are several people on our Zoom account. If that's, there just needs to be, I'm going to give a verbal disclaimer right now, speaking, if I can, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. But if anyone out there abuses this, our Zoom account, they could face up to criminal charges. I want to just be very clear on that. We don't take abuse here. This is a public meeting for your benefit, but we respect the public and would ask the same in return. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. And just for those listening, we have agreed that we will take comments publicly through the Zoom. I think, Bill, you're going to monitor that. And when they're ready to speak, again, we're going to ask you that those remarks pertain to the agenda item we're discussing. If for some reason that doesn't happen, then you will be terminated from the conversation in the meeting. So again, be respectful of your comments if you are going to provide comments through the Zoom. I appreciate your remarks on that. Commissioner.
Those actually were forwarded to me by IT, and so I'm not live on Zoom right now and can't see it, but I'm just voicing what the IT said there.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just not
Yeah.
live.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have Zoom right here, so I can't see the comments, what's being referred to.
Bill's our moderator for our Zoom
Yeah.
account right now.
Is there anything we need to answer, Bill, right now?
It's actually going to be more on Shelley. I'm just controlling it in here.
Okay.
Oh,
Shelley's monitoring it, and I'm assuming that their comments are going to be for the public hearing.
That's correct.
So we'll know at that time.
Right. So, again, we're not going to take any comments on any action items G1 through 4. We will take public comments on the public hearing portion. So for those on Zoom, just be aware of that. Correct? Okay, Commissioners, I'm ready for a motion on consent items.
I'd make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we approve the consent items F1 through 7.
Thank you. We have a motion.
second?
We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion carries. Consent items are approved. Thank you. Let me just move on to our action items. Just for a way of clarification, we are changing the order somewhat for our action items. Action item G1 will be heard at a later date, so that will no longer be taking comment or be discussed today. So G2 will now become number 1 on our action item, and we will switch agenda item, action items 4 to 3. We'll switch places. So action item 4 will now be 2, and action item 4 will be 3. So is that clear, Commissioners? So one will be
Here's Mud.
eliminated.
Hold on, you said action item 4 will be 2, and then you said action item 4 will be 3.
So action item 3,
We're eliminating number 1, right?
one goes away.
Okay, that I'm aware of.
One goes away, yeah. So,
Okay, well, it was clear as mud there.
okay, so we'll start with, actually, what will show on your agenda is 2, request for approval of a resolution adopting the 2020 final tax rates for Weber County and the Municipal Service Fund, and Scott Park is here to explain that to us.
Yes, Ricky was unable to make it this morning, and so he asked me to fill in for him. So the process for the budget is that in November, the commissioners get together and they identify their funding priorities, and we actually set a dollar amount in our taxes that we need to collect. And the reason why we set a dollar amount and not a tax rate is we don't know the values of the homes. The homes aren't valued until January 1st. And then there's an opportunity to appeal the value of your home and such. And so what we do now is we take the revenue that we had budgeted, and then we divide that by the values that are out there, and that's how we back into the tax rate. So what we're doing now is just looking for final approval of those tax rates. Just as a reminder, what we did in the budget is we lowered the general fund tax rate by $1 million. $500,000 is an actual tax decrease, and $500,000 we pulled out of the general fund and set aside in a flood control line. So the actual general fund taxes will go down $500,000. And then on the other end, on the Municipal Services Fund, we actually doubled that tax rate on the unincorporated areas of Weber County. So what that did as a reminder is about 95-ish% of the people will see a tax decrease on their bill. Actually, everyone will see a tax decrease in the general fund line, and then those in the unincorporated areas will see their unincorporated rate go up.
Right.
So then all we're doing is just looking for final approval on those rates.
Okay, and we've had at least, 2 or 3 public hearings on this last year.
Yes.
And explain that this was a tax decrease for everyone in the county. It was a slight tax increase for approximately 14,000 of our residents, including myself and Commissioner Harvey here. So we were part of that increase. But in general, it was a tax decrease. So questions, comments, Commissioners?
It's Resolution 15.
I'd make a motion that we approve Resolution 15. I kind of give Commissioner Harvey a hard time last week for approving and making the motions, and now he won't make one today.
No.
No, my feelings are still hurt, but thank you for acknowledging that.
Keep in mind, he's a little tender, so be careful. Okay, we have a motion. Resolution 15.
Right.
And we have a second.
So
Bottom.
it's nice, though, too, that I hope this comes out very loud and clear, that this is a tax decrease, overall tax decrease for 94% of the residents of Weber County. This isn't so, we don't have anybody here, or we didn't have anybody in comments speaking to the tax decrease. So I'm glad to know that we're headed the right direction. And how are we again, Mr. Park, based on our fund balance in our rainy day fund, so to speak? How are we poised right now?
We're the strongest we've ever been since I've been employed with the county. So when I started, our fund balance was about $14 million, and at the end of 2019, we ended with about $27 million. We've positioned ourselves well, anticipating a rainy day to come in the future. We've built up our reserves, we've paid off debt, and we are in a very strong spot to move forward.
I would say, Commissioners, as well as anything right now, we're having a rainy day or a rainy year. And so if this rainy year were to continue, could we withstand the rest of the year, or how far out could we go?
If we made no changes, as in we continued to spend as we had before all this happened, we would still have several years at that same expenditure level before we had to start to cut back. Now, obviously, we wouldn't do that. We would make and trim the budget as we go forward, anticipating these things. But even if we didn't, we still have several years that we would be fine.
So because of the way the county's been managed over the last few years, in your estimation, do we anticipate any kind of we're decreasing the taxes now, do you anticipate us needing any kind of a tax increase in the next few years?
For the general fund, I would say no. We do continue to try to balance to make sure that everybody's paying the appropriate share, so we'll continue to look at our unincorporated areas to make sure that they're not being unfairly subsidized by residents in the city. So I want to be careful to say that we may tweak tax rates going forward, but what we're trying to do is not generate additional revenue. We're trying to balance out that burden so those in the unincorporated areas are paying for the services they receive, and we're not relying on subsidies from different areas.
Right, and just to be clear too, just want to make sure, is there anything that this body of commissioners can do right now that will have any effect on tax rates with the school district or with the fire district or with the mosquito abatement district or with any of the other districts that they might, all those line items that appear on there, there's 15 or 17 line items on a tax bill. We really can only control the general fund and a couple of others. All those other ones, is there really anything we can do about that?
Those rates are set independently from the Weber County Commissioners. You actually have no ability to influence the school district rate, the special service district rates, the local service district rates. They're all set by their own boards. They all hold their own truth and taxation hearings if they want to increase their rates. It just happens to come on one bill from the Weber County Treasurer's Office.
So because we're the ones that collect it, sometimes they all think that it comes from this body, but that's not the case then.
It's correct. So I use the analogy sometimes trying to explain it to citizens that you're the dairy farmers and you don't control the price of bread and you don't control the price of sugar. You're the dairy farmers, and so you can control the price of milk, and you control the Weber County lines on your bill. When someone goes up and pays their grocery bill, they're paying for a lot of things, not just milk. That's all you can control is the price of milk. You can only control the Weber County tax rates. You can't control all those other rates, even though at the end of the day it says John Bond, Weber County Treasurer on that bill. That's a whole bunch of different people adding all their stuff to that one piece of paper.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's worth noting, Scott, so when we talk about the increase, that deals with the municipal service tax rate, the mill levy. And if you were to compare the Weber County's levy tax rate compared to all the other cities that have a municipal service, where do we fall within that ledger?
So before the tax rate, the unincorporated area had the lowest tax of any city that had property taxes in Weber County. And now we doubled the rate, and they still have the lowest tax rate of any city that has a tax rate in Weber County. So we say double, and we're talking about going from $20 to $40 when you compare to Ogden City, where they're paying $300. Right. Or Roy City, more comparable to that. So we doubled the rate, we're still the lowest.
Yeah, and I think that's worth noting, because if you look at if you're a resident of Ogden City or pay taxes in Ogden City, that municipal service comes out, I think on one of my tax bills last year, it was just around $350. If I looked at my Weber County, it was roughly $30 or $40. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about tax increase, the relevant really information is how many dollars did somebody pay out of their pocket and compared to what they're doing in other cities. And I think that bodes well for the commission, as you brought up, Commissioner Harvey, that it does well for what we've done in the past as a commission and properly manage taxpayer dollars.
So just if I may, just to be clear, so if I live in Ogden City or Roy City or Hooper City or North Ogden City or Riverdale City or Harrisville City, are you saying that, one, our tax rate in Weber County is less than, and two, that's the first question, and two, if I live in one of those cities, is there anything that this body of elected officials here in the Weber County Commission, is there anything that this body can do to affect their tax rate?
So, to answer your first question, the unincorporated areas of Weber County are treated like a city, and you're the mayors of unincorporated, and your rate is much lower than any other city. Now, I will point out, though, that we do provide a different level of service, so we don't have, curb and sidewalk and street lights in some of our rural areas of the county. So we have a lower tax rate, but there's also a lower level of service that we have to provide. But again, as commissioners of Weber County, you're allowed to affect the tax rate of Weber County. As mayors of unincorporated Weber County, you're allowed to affect the tax rate of unincorporated Weber County, but you don't have any ability to impact the Riverdale City's tax rate or the Ogden City tax rate, other than your relationship with the mayors and you're talking to them. You don't have any legal or statutory authority to adjust their tax rates up or down.
If a person lived in one of those cities and wanted to affect that tax rate, what would they do?
I would refer them to their city county,
Very good.
or excuse me, their city commission, city
This
city
is just an
councils.
opportunity to inform. Thank you, Mr. Park.
Thank you. Additional questions?
Yeah,
Mr. Jenkins.
I can't not say a few comments here. First of all, thank you, Scott, for all you do for the county. You do a tremendous job, and we're very pleased with what you do. When you talk about our tax rate and how it's affected, before we had the 100% tax increase last year, our fund in the municipal services was going which way?
It was going broke. We were spending more. The cost of providing the services were more than the revenues we were receiving.
Right. So the services we provide to unincorporated, we keep track of them individually, don't we?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we were going broke. So now that we've doubled the increase, what's happening to that fund?
So that fund, I wish I could say that it had, was now increasing in revenues. It's not. What we've done is we've reduced it from a steep slope to, I'm hoping that it's flat. Before all this COVID, I had hoped that maybe it would be flat, but I don't think it's going to be flat. I think we're still going to spend more money this year than we have, on the service we provide than we're going to get in revenue that we collect. And so that's why I mentioned earlier that, while I think the general fund is in a strong position not to need a tax increase, I do think that it may be appropriate to look at the municipal services fund rates as we continue to go forward to make sure that the citizens in the unincorporated areas pay for the services they receive and don't get unfairly subsidized from citizens in other cities.
Very good. There was an awfully rosy picture painted there, and I wanted to make sure that they realized that there is still a few little areas in that rosy picture that we've got to fix. Secondly is the library. Now, the library's healthy right now, and it's extremely healthy, but we've got the same problem here. The citizens voted to bond here several years ago and build libraries, and we've just finished that process. And we were hoping to get a year's worth of budget so we could know where to change our tax on libraries so that we could run this next year. Well, with COVID and everything that's happened, all of a sudden that's been disrupted. But we do have almost 3 months of operating, and I'm hoping that we can use that to make a pretty educated guess or recommendation where that's going to be for next year. But from what we can see, we're once again, the curve on that fund balance is going down, isn't it?
Yes, the library fund, when we opened up the new library, there was no additional revenue put in for operating expenditures. So while the citizens voted to fund the building itself through a bond, they didn't vote to increase the operating revenues for the library. And so that is something that we need to look at as you were mentioning, we were hoping to get a good solid year of operating expenditures. To make that judgment, we're going to have to do our best guess when we come to this budget cycle in the fall to look to make sure that we have sufficient amount of revenue to cover the operating expenditures going forward.
Thank you, sir. So finally, we started a flood control fund last year, and we took money out of the general fund and put in a separate line item that we had allocated towards flood control in the county. And with that money, there's a drainage system within the county that operates, and it's a storm drain. So when we get a large storm in one part of the county, it starts in, let's talk, several years ago we had a large storm in North Ogden that came through and washed a lot of North Ogden out. Well, it didn't just affect North Ogden, it went all the way down the northern drain, and it went all the way to Smith and Edwards and goes under the canal, Smith and Edwards, and heads west, and then it goes through all our canals and series of waterways until it gets to the lake. Well, we have the responsibility of maintaining that. And so that $500,000 that we've put there, number one, it funds the county's portion of that drainage system that we need to maintain. But also, we're looking at the possibility of increasing that because there's several things along that drainage system and other drainage systems in the county that we've really not taken direct control or responsibility for. And we're approaching the time, I believe, where we need to decide who's going to be responsible for what portion of that. And secondly, we do have the tail end of a major river, two major rivers. One coming out of Ogden Canyon and the other one coming out of Weber Canyon. And most of the time, those two rivers peak 2 or 3 weeks apart from each other, about 3 weeks, because Ogden comes down a little faster than the west side of the upper Uinta, or the Uintas, where the Weber river starts. And so there's a little bit of difference. But once in a while, we have years where they peak within a week of each other. And boy, when we get those peaks that coincide, then we're in trouble. And we've done some things out west to work on that peak, that Little Weber waterway. But that Little Weber waterway was developed so far and then it was just stopped. And we've never finished it. So this year, we actually started with the property owner that owns the majority of that is Randy Marriott. And we went out there this year and started working on this waterway through his property so that it can get through into the lake without doing a lot of damage. And frankly, we made some tremendous inroads. I didn't think we'd get this far this year. I expected this to be a 3 or 4 year process. And I'm of the opinion from what Joe Hadley's done, our roads superintendent, that we will be through that process next year, where we'll have Randy in a position where he'll be safe. And thank goodness we had a light spring this year, our runoff. So I think we're actually in pretty good shape with where that's at. And we have one more winter to work on that before we get major runoffs again. And so I'm pretty tickled about that. But anyway, I suspect as time goes on that flood control, those dollars will have to be increased a little. And of course, we don't really know yet because we've yet to even experience the first year under this. So we've made some pretty good changes here in the county that are good changes. It gives us the ability to drill down into the weeds and manage small portions of our budget. But we did a aerial, yeah, I'd call it an aerial look the other day at Salt Lake County's flood control process and the things they do in Salt Lake County on flood control. And I was absolutely amazed by the detail of which they've got to handle floods. And of course, This goes back to the City Creek floods in 98 or 92 or 86.
It was in 1983.
1983.
83, that spring.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, thank you, Commissioner. Anyway, I think their control has been as a result of some major flooding they had that did huge damage. And when I look at where they've gone, I was absolutely amazed with it. They've done tremendous things. Well, it showed our inefficiencies. And we have a few areas that we need to make some pretty big changes on pretty quick. Number one is this northern drain. You know, as it goes through far west and out into Plain City and down through parts of Pleasant View, it's just a ditch right now. It just really isn't more than that. And we really need to look at that and decide what the future's going to be and what we're going to do on a county, on a major trunk line, the county portion of it. Everybody else, of course, has to tie into it, but we need to do that. So I just wanted to thank you, commissioners, for what I feel. When I look at my year and a half here, when I look at this budget and some of the things we've done to start putting ourselves in a fiscally strong position, I think we've made major steps in doing that. And I thank both of you.
Yeah. Thank you.
2 years May. You had your 2-year anniversary May 13th.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's
you're
true.
ahead of me
I
by
forgot.
6 months. So.
Okay, 2 years.
Appreciate your work and under your portfolio taking the lead on that, Commissioner. So it's good. So since we've opened up this tax policy 101 discussion, I just wanted to make sure we're clear. Scott, you mentioned that we can't have a city subsidize the unincorporated area, and I believe that comes to us by way of the state legislature, which we know in their wisdom does great things. But we also have different parts of our county, western, eastern, that have different economics. So is it fair for, let's say, for lower Weber County unincorporated to subsidize upper Weber County, excluding, we know that we can't have that taking place within the cities. How do we handle that within the county itself? Is it fair that one part of the county subsidizes another, or is there a solution to that potential discrepancy? And do we have the numbers, do we have the data that we could actually use to make that adjustment so we know that Western Weber County, for example, was paying the share, not subsidizing? Can you deal with it?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've been working on a project for over the last year and a half to see if we can better track the costs in the upper valley versus the lower valley, and also on top of the mountain near where Summit is developing those additional houses. And so what we're looking at doing this year, and we've had some discussions in open work meetings, and we're still working on some of the documentation, is potentially dividing that municipal services area into 3 separate areas. And so that what we would do is we would say, okay, here's the cost of maintaining a road in the upper valley. And then what we would do is say, okay, now how much does it cost additional to maintain a road on the top of Powder Mountain? And then we would set the tax rates differently so that the the upper valley area would pay for just the cost of maintaining their roads and providing their services, their police, and the other services we provide. And Powder Mountain would have to pay for their cost of service. So if it's more expensive to live on the top of the mountain, you'd pay a slightly higher tax rate to cover the cost of living on the top of the mountain. And same thing with the upper valley versus the lower valley. We would look at the number of miles of road, we would look at the services that are provided, and we do track those costs now. We can tell you how much time the roads equipment is spending on the upper valley versus the lower valley. We can tell you how many building permits are in the upper valley and the lower valley, and how many building inspections we're doing in those different areas. And so we're setting it up so that, commissioners, if you decide, you can split that tax rate from one unincorporated rate into 3 separate municipal areas, and then each one of those areas would have a rate sufficient to cover their cost of services. So we're not, just like we don't want Roy City residents to subsidize unincorporated, we really don't want Lower Valley residents subsidizing Powder Mountain.
Makes perfect sense. It kind of sounds like those people that are taking advantage of those services should pay for it, and those that aren't, don't pay for it.
And that's the intent. We're not trying to look to generate additional revenue from any of these people. We're just looking for them to cover the cost of their services.
Sounds like sound tax policy to me, so well, thank you for that explanation. Okay, additional comments, questions relating to tax policy 101? Seeing none,
Can I take a roll call?
go ahead.
Commissioner Harvey? Aye. Commissioner Jenkins?
Aye.
Chair Farrar?
Aye, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a long way around one motion, but I think that was good information, Scott. We appreciate, again, following up what Commissioner Jenkins said, we appreciate the work you do for this county very much. You keep us on track. Absolutely. Okay, so we're now going to item 2, action item 2, which is request for approval of an ordinance of the County Commissioners of Weber County establishing a library capital project fund, and this would actually be our second reading, the way I understand it. Brian?
Yes, we went over this in depth last week. As the title suggests, this ordinance would set up a capital projects fund for the library. If you have any questions or concerns that have come up since last week, I'm happy to address those. Otherwise, we just need a vote to pass the ordinance.
Great. Questions? Commissioner Harvey, this is in your portfolio.
We had a great, robust discussion last week about this, and I'm ready to make the motion when you're ready, Mr. Chair.
I'm ready.
Make the motion that we approve the ordinance of the Weber County Commissioners establishing a library capital projects fund.
I will second that with a comment.
Go ahead.
So it's important to understand why we're doing what we're doing. This capital project fund, from bond proceeds and in their operations, the library is healthy right now. They had some excess dollars. Even though our funding for operations is going down at a poor rate, as Scott Park just analyzed or just told us. So we're setting this money aside in a capital projects account so that we can do maintenance and possibly someday build a final library out west somewhere in the county. But in the meantime, we start the process of putting a little money away, and I'm very much in favor of this. I think this is very strong fiscal policy here that we're creating and doing. And I think it's very good what we've done here. So with that, I second.
Thank you. We have a second. I'm very much in favor. This gives us an account that we can use, as we talked about last week, for future buildings and maintenance of our existing, which makes sense. Okay.
Commissioner Harvey?
Aye.
Commissioner Jenkins?
Aye.
Chair Farrar?
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on now to our next action item, which is request for approval of the Heritage Land Development Appeal to the Western Weber Planning Commission denial of preliminary approval for Taylor's Landing, which is a 156-lot cluster subdivision located at approximately 4,000 west, 2,200 south. And Mr. Perks from Planning will go through that with us. And this is a request for approval of that denial from the Planning Commission, just so we're clear on that, Commissioners.
Good morning, Commissioners. As indicated, this is a request by the applicant of the Heritage Land Development. The applicant is the Heritage Land Development. It's a request to overturn the denial of the Western Weber Planning Commission on preliminary approval of their cluster subdivision, which is named Taylor Landing, which is a 156-lot cluster subdivision. I believe that we are going to have a quick comment from Mr. Crockett on this.
Yep.
Sure. Just for the benefit of the public, to explain the process of how these appeals work. Normally, appeals from land use authorities, such as the Planning Commission, go to the Board of Adjustment, but there are a few that actually go to the County Commission, and an appeal of a request for preliminary approval actually goes to the County Commission. And so the specific thing that the County Commission has to look at is the record from the Planning Commission. We do not hear this anew. We don't hear the facts again. All we look at is what was presented to the Planning Commission, the minutes, and to determine whether the Planning Commission got it right or whether they erred in their interpretation and application of the land use code. The burden of proof is actually on the appellant to prove that the land use authority erred. And then the county commission, after hearing the appellant, shall determine the correctness of the land use authority's interpretation, application of the plain meaning of the land use regulations, and also interpret and apply a land use regulation to favor a land use application unless the land use regulation plainly restricts the land use application. In addition, I know there may be members of the public who have an interest in this, but since this is a review of the record, public comment is prohibited.
Now, Mr. Crockett, we can hear from the appealant, though, if they're here. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes,
so I'm
they have a
clear.
due process right to have
right.
a voice in this. And once all of the evidence has been submitted and the arguments have been made, if the county commission determines that it would like to deliberate this, they are entitled to go into closed session if they so choose.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and Commissioners, just to clarify, staff is happy to clarify any points of the record, and the applicant is attending via Zoom if we have any questions for them on that as well.
Okay, does that conclude your presentation?
It does, yep.
Let's, do we have questions or comments? You say the applicant's online on Zoom?
Yep, so Jay Stocking, the owner, and then Jessica Prestwich, who is the authorized representative, are on Zoom.
Okay, is it Jessica?
Jessica, yep.
Can you hear us, Jessica?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much. The time's yours if you'd like to make remarks regarding the request for the upholding or denial of the Planning Commission's decision.
Okay. Are you still there?
We're here. Uh-huh.
Okay. Sorry, my screen just changed. So I guess my biggest thing would be to state that we did everything that we could to follow the cluster subdivision code. The definition of the prime agriculture land states that we have to prove that the area has soil types that are capable of having highest nutrient content, best irrigation capabilities, and it offers marketable opportunities of crop production. We had the soil study done, and at the last meeting we went to, the soil study was provided. If you want to look at the soil, I believe you have it in front of you. The soil study is there. And there are a couple different pages on there. If you want to turn to page, let me find the staff report.
Commissioners, it is page 26 of the staff report.
Okay.
Is that the beginning?
Okay, go ahead.
So on page, did you say 26? I have it on page 35. Is it 3.3 of the soil analysis results? These are the soil, this is the actual soil that was taken from our property. And so next to each one, it tells us exactly what we need to do to make this open space prime agriculture land for us to be able to produce the alfalfa that we plan to do on this piece of property. So, and this property, or this piece is also the best place for us to put the drainage for the irrigation. The irrigation would go out to, or drain to 1800. If we were to move the open space, we would have issues with it being around the homes. It'd be hard to irrigate out past those, and we'd hate to run into any issues with flooding. So we feel that the irrigation going that way would be the best. And then another thing we need to do is to keep it contiguous, and that is also what we're doing in that area. One other thing that we also need to address is a lift station. And after meeting with the city engineers, the lift station will also go in this open spaced area.
So this is Jay Stocking. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. So we consulted with the soils engineer to make sure we were doing best use for the property. And there, if you're looking at that map, you can see on the west, there is some better soil types that would naturally be ready to go now. But we consulted with a farmer, local farmer there that does a lot of farming, and his take on the property was that west property is got a lot of back and forth in it, not a lot of long straight lines. So it makes it harder for him to irrigate, and it makes the crop production for equipment getting around there a lot more difficult. And so we realized there is going to have to be some work on the east end that we're willing to do to make it the best use for the farmer. And I believe that's what the code is really trying to accomplish, is getting property that farmers want to use, will use, and will produce crops. If we have a big open space there that has a lot of corners in it, it's hard to irrigate. They assume a lot of liability and responsibility by irrigating it to flood out potential neighbors there. Then in the long run, are we really actually going to be able to get a farmer in there just because neighbors are saying, hey, I want the open space next to my home? I don't think that's what the code is trying to accomplish. The code is trying to accomplish best use for agriculture, and so that's why we brought in an expert that is a local farmer there that probably farms as much or more than any other farmers in the area. And it was his recommendation that we put it right where we put it. And so we looked at multiple designs, and this is what he came up with, in feeling like that works the best. So it's not like we just went out there and said this works best for our development, because there probably are some different ways we could lay it out that is better for us, but we wanted to accomplish what the county code was asking for, and part of that was doing our due diligence with working with an expert on this. And we kind of feel like in that meeting, nobody listened to the expert. It was all about how they felt. And, you know, we need to really go off of facts. And with the irrigation type, flood irrigation out there, it is easier to flood irrigate something that has long straight lines that they can create a slope and get it the direction they want to go and keep it out of other people's property. And so that's why we feel like we've done exactly what's asked of us. We met with officials at the county, we met with farmers, we met with other experts that did the soil study, and we really tried to accomplish what the code is asking for.
Thank you for those remarks. Anything else you'd like to talk to the commissioners about?
We have one other person here from Heritage. Boyd, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Commission. I assume you can hear me. And
yes, we
thanks,
can.
Jessica, for your comments, and Jay for your comments. I do also just want to add to exactly what Jay Stocking is talking about. If you look at the map, you'll see that really none of the current land is being farmed. If we do what we have proposed, we believe that we can turn this into some prime farmland that will be used and will be utilized as green and farm space. Also, to Jessica's point, there's a big drainage pipe that's going in on 1800 South, as I'm sure the Commission is aware. And that's why we're proposing to put it, another reason why we're proposing the space to go, the green space to go in that northeast corner, so that it can drain, as was indicated, to those appropriate spots instead of into people's yards.
Makes sense. Anything else?
I have a question.
I don't have anything else.
I did, just one last thing, sorry. On that page 43, there, it indicates that there is the non-prime farmland, the prime farmland if irrigated, prime farmland if irrigated and drained. So all of this land is prime land if. And so what we're proposing is that we go in and create it so that it becomes prime farmland. None of this land is right now, as it sits, prime farmland. Something's going to have to be done to it at some point to make it prime farmland, and that's exactly what we're proposing to do, is create that space and turn it into prime agricultural property.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. Questions from the commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Jenkins.
So, Boyd, as I looked at your property here, this appears to me that you've just been grazing this, and it's really been even unseeded. You really don't even plant it, do you?
That's correct. It's currently just being unformed.
Right. All right. Secondly, Scott, this is to you.
Mm-hmm.
The code seems to create a conflict here. And I want to talk to you guys about this because as I went through this and reviewed it, and the conflict comes from requirements that we've put in it that requires soil analysis, and we go out there and we try to tell a farmer or a property owner his business. And these guys have kind of brought this up right now. Boyd, Mr. Cook, just did this, where he said, look, this has the ability to be prime farmland. It's our intention to farm it, and this is what we're planning on doing. So number one, in the way they look at it, there seems to be a natural conflict there. Number two is now we're getting into agricultural land. We're sticking our nose and we're saying, well, you got to farm it or you don't have to farm it. And I mean, what's the matter with him putting 30 acres of weeds out there? I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, I don't want to see 30 acres of weeds. Don't get me wrong. But what I want to see is I view this as almost a taking, where we go out and insist farmers do certain things with their property. Now, most farmers are pretty smart people, and so they know that to leave land idle costs them because they have to pay taxes on it and they get nothing off of it. But on the flip side, we are now putting ourselves into a position where we're telling them that they have what they have to do, and thus you have your second conflict. Can you address those?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. As
well, and let me say one more thing before you get started.
Sure.
When I watch the Planning Commission and what they did here, and I read through these minutes and I see where they decided to turn it down, it was based on the soils analysis. Do they have another option there? Because if not, we set them up. By approving this ordinance, we set them up for conflict. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
There is some conflict in the code in the sense of the cluster subdivision code requires that we preserve the prime land first. But when you look at the definition of prime land, it does indicate that soils or areas that are capable of becoming prime could also be considered prime when and if they get to that point. And so when you look at the map and the soils analysis, there's a myriad of different soils. Some are labeled as currently more prime than others. But if you look at the code face value where it says prime shall be preserved first, period, and just leave it at that, then obviously that's where you would think would need to happen. When you dig a little bit deeper and look at other sections of the code, it does indicate that the applicant has the ability to make a more contiguous, more useful space for large crop production. And so there's a few things to look at there, and obviously the findings of staff versus the findings of the Planning Commission show that conflict.
So did the planning commission who turned this down, did they delve in to the fact that it's prime, just unused ground, and that if they irrigate it and cultivate it and put it into production, that it will be prime ground?
So I can't speak on behalf of the commission, but they, as we went through that process, it is a spectrum of soils. Some varying better than worse.
2 pages
currently.
worth of soils.
Right. And so, if you look at some versus others, and if you look at just the face value of, okay, well, here's what the map says right now versus what it could be in the future, I think that's where the conflict lies.
Yeah, so you didn't answer my question. I'm trying to get an opinion here out of you. Are you going to give me one, or would you rather not?
Well, Commissioner, we've been asked not to expound beyond the record, and so I'm trying to be, I guess, diplomatic about that.
Okay. Is there anybody representing the Planning Commission here today?
And I don't believe the Planning Commission would be a party to this action.
I don't think they have.
Yeah, but you would certainly like to get an opinion from them of why they voted the way they did. I mean,
and to that, I would say the record with the minutes that shows their dialogue that they had on this. And in the minutes, I do believe that definition of prime agricultural land was read into the record.
it was. I went through the minutes here, and there were several things that were pointed out here. I highlighted some of them. Chair Edwards stated, based on Figure 3 of Phase 1, that the open space falls into prime land. So he mentioned that. And the rest does not. He states that based on the soil analysis, he does not feel the developer is meeting the definition of the cluster code. So it was based on the soil analysis, not what they felt like they could do. And he even stated in the previous statement that if it was labeled and fell under prime land. So thus, when I read this, that's when my brain clicked and said, well, we've created a conflict here that really can't be overcome, and we've put the Planning Commission into a position where they had to turn it down because they're just based it on the soil analysis. But it appears to me that prime land should be taken into consideration in this. Now, I'm not sure we can solve this under this circumstance today because of this, but in the near future, I think we need to look at our ordinance to solve this conflict, because we have two conflicting issues here. One is prime that's unfarmed, and the other one, or not in production. Yeah, unfarmed, that's the same. And the other one is where they come across here and say, well, the soil analysis says, you know, this came very evident to me this past year, or well, actually it was 2 years ago, when we opened that little Weber diversion canal, and Randy Marriott got flooded out on the bottom end. And after it was all over with, he come to me one day, and we were talking, and he says to me, he says, you know, he says, when that those phragmites are small and young, he says, I can graze them. He said, I had 800 cows, 800 head of cattle out in those phragmites, grazing them down. And he says, when I graze them down, then as they grow up, he can continue to graze them. Well, he says, you forced me off that property for 6 weeks, and of course that was 3 or 4, 5 feet of growth. Next thing you know, now he can't graze it. And he says, what makes my beef less valued than their onions or their potatoes or their whatever they're growing, their corn? And his argument is dead on. And this is the analysis that comes into this right here, where we're talking about prime land that as part of the ordinance, in our ordinance, we say that they can move it and they can develop it and they can farm it in these other areas. But the way it reads here, it comes down to a soil analysis. And I'm just not sure that's right. Anyway, that's kind of a complicated analysis in my mind of this whole thing. But that's where I come across as Scott. I really feel like we've conflicted the whole process here.
You know, if I may,
Go ahead.
Chair? One of the problems goes back to, and I think I followed you pretty good there, Commissioner. I respect the fact, Mr. Perks, that you can't give an opinion. I respect the position that we're in right now. A lot of this comes from the fact that we need to do a re-evaluation of our master plan. And I've recently learned that when the Planning Commission addressed this back, the last time we had a master plan review of the Lower Valley was in 2003, but that was only in part. It was only the western part of the Lower Valley. All the unincorporated pieces around the county, including North Ogden, Roy, Ogden, all the little islands that we've talked about over the last couple of years, and especially Uinta, they're dealing with a master plan from 1970, 50 years old. I think things have changed in 50 years. I think a few more houses have been built. Some farms, certainly there's been a lot of growth in 50 years. My home's been built within 50 years, not much before, not much after, but most of the homes most people live in have been built within 50 years. And I think, seriously, Commissioners, we need to take a look at doing some kind of a master plan review. I know that we stopped this because out of respect for those Western neighbors who felt that they had some questions to answer whether or not they wanted to incorporate or not. We were all ready to go, ready to get started and get that going at the very first part of 2019. We had it funded. All three of us participated in that budget process that funded that master plan. And we got just dead out of respect for the neighbors, we decided to pull that back and wait. But I think this is a great example, what you just presented, that we need to do something to address these problems. I like supporting the Planning Commission. I think they all have genuine good interests, but I hate having them be painted into a corner because I support the plan too. I mean, this is a tough situation. So those are my comments up to this point.
Thank you. Anything else, Commissioner Jenkins?
Well, my only point here, do you want to take more comments?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just...
No, well, go ahead and then we'll take...
do you?
Yeah, go ahead and finish and we'll finish up with the appellant.
Well, I'm ready to make a motion. Would you rather go somewhere else first?
Yeah, let's, before we make that motion. So I just want to clarify a couple things. Now, I went through the full packet last night, and it was interesting reading for about an hour. So the first thing I want to make on the public record is that under ordinance right now, in this particular zone, it would require somebody could come in with 30% open space. And it's my understanding in reading, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this applicant has about 58, almost 59% open space. So is that correct? Or
That is correct. For cluster subdivisions in this zone, 30 is the minimum.
30 is the minimum. So as I look at this, the applicant's almost doubled what somebody else could come in and do for open space. The second part of that goes back to Commissioner Jenkins' comments about possible taking. I think that, again, we've created this. Prime farm ground doesn't become prime unless it's irrigated. And I'm going to take I look at the word from the farmer who was out there doing the work that knows that property can be put in production with irrigation. And without irrigation, it's probably not. The other part is I've looked at this cluster subdivision, both in our county and as we've had discussions in this in the past in the state. The idea behind clustering and having open space was to have a parcel of ground in open space that could be put in production, that could be put to use, rather than be 20 acres of weeds that we see happening in other parts, other cities. So open space in a cluster, in my mind, the key component, whether it's prime farm ground, soil studies, whatever, can it be farmed at the end of the day? Can that be utilized for something other than a potential park in 20 years or other use? And to me, the staff, I think, made a good recommendation that they felt that that was a viable parcel of open space. So anyway, that's my comments. Anything else from the applicant before we move forward? You still on the line?
Yeah, if I may, appreciate the commissioner's comments as well. I think it's spot on that that use of that land on the north side is the best use, and that's why we've got more open space than required, is because we went with what the farmer's recommendation was on that open space and the best use for that open space.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This is Jay Stocking. One comment the farmer did make to us is he said, if it doesn't go in this location, I'm not interested in farming it for you. And that hit us pretty hard, because ultimately I'm not interested in going down there and farming it myself. And so I would like somebody local telling us what they will and will not do. And he just flat out said, if it does not go here, you'll have to find somebody else to farm it. And he says, I don't know who that'll be.
Good information. Okay, thank you very much for that. Mr. Perks, does that end your presentation?
Yep, unless you have any other questions for me.
Questions for Mr. Perks before we move to motion? I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we move the agenda and put this on next week's agenda. This gives me a week to dig into this a little more. We had a really busy day yesterday and the day before, and or the last Friday and Thursday, and I'd like to go out and walk this property and put my feet on the ground and look at it. And I just didn't. I was hoping to get out there last night and just didn't get a chance to do it. So anyway, that's my motion. Let's see what happens with it.
So motion is to move the next agenda item, has the effect of tabling the motion for the action item until next week.
Second with a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, it was 3 years ago, about now, that I had the head of the Utah Farm Bureau come to my office and petition for this very thing. It works good for some if it's not their property, you know. And so I like the idea of putting a little more time and thought into this. I don't know which way to go on this. Like I say, I like supporting the Planning Commission, but on this particular one, I think that Mr. Cook and Ms. Presswich and Mr. Stocking have made a good point. I'm inclined to lean that direction, but before I make a final say, I'd like to spend just a little more time looking at it.
Okay, and I'm not opposed to the extension. At the same time, we owe the respect and timeliness to the applicant to make sure this gets heard in a timely fashion. I think that if you spend some time going through the information that was provided to us in the packet, you'll come up with a decision. So with that, I'll place the motion. All those in favor of moving to the next agenda item, say aye.
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 Chair votes aye. Our motion is carried. So applicant, we will, and Shelley, Stacy, let's make sure this gets put on top of the agenda for next week. So we will, the intent here is applicant is not to what we call in the legislative business slow cook you. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to have your voice heard, and we'll make a decision on this next week. Thank you. All right, commissioners, that takes us to agenda item H, public hearing. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn and go into a public hearing.
No, my feelings are still hurt. No, I so move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're now in a public hearing. Let's deal with the first first agenda item on our public hearing. And under the public hearing, just as a reminder, we do hear and will hear public comment, both in public for those that that are here in the chamber this morning, as well as those that may be listening, viewing this online. So with that, we're going to have a public hearing, our first public hearing regarding an amendment to the Weber County Code 108-16 and 110-2 to clarify Ogden Valley outdoor lighting and illuminating sign allowance. Mr. Perks, you're back up.
Thanks again, Commissioners. So, as indicated, this is a public hearing to look at this Ogden Valley outdoor lighting code and to consider some of the proposed amendments to that. The code in its current form has been in place since 2017, and as we've gone through the last couple of years administering this code and enforcing it, we've learned of a few opportunities to improve it, close some loopholes, correct some errors, and also to add a few additional modifications. We went through a couple of work sessions with the Ogden Valley Planning Commission on these proposed amendments and have come up with the amendments as they're currently proposed, obviously. And the Ogden Valley Planning Commission held a public hearing towards the end of April and passed a positive recommendation on these amendments. I'm happy to go through these if you have any questions on them. There are two amendments in here that were made following the Planning Commission recommendation that we'd like to explain. And they are fairly simple, but they were ideas that came up after the fact. The first of which is changing the name of the ordinance as a whole from Ogden Valley Outdoor Lighting to simply Outdoor Lighting. And the reason why we think this may be a good idea is because this ordinance is actually applicable to some cluster subdivisions out in western Weber that have been given density bonuses. And if they have those density bonuses, the idea is being that we have them add these types of fixtures that are night sky compliant. And so in an effort to improve the applicability and understanding of who this ordinance applies to, we would propose that we change the name to Outdoor Lighting instead of Ogden Valley Outdoor Lighting. The other item that we wanted to discuss with you just briefly is not necessarily a new amendment, but just a clarification. We were asked to look into one proposed amendment, and that's towards the end of the ordinance. This is on page 8 of the staff report under the subsection entitled Creation of Dark Sky Committee. And as we went through planning commission work sessions, one member of the public suggested that the proposed members of this committee remain as a grassroots committee with only public members making up that committee. And so they thought maybe it would be a good idea to take out a planning division employee as is currently listed in the ordinance. We've kind of gone back and forth on that as maybe an employee could help them clarify a few things in code and kind of tie it back to the county, but we could go either way on that and just wanted to see if you guys had a preference. But those are the two things we wanted to bring up before we went forward with any hearing or discussion on this.
Thank you. Questions on those two amendments before we move to the full discussion?
So, Scott, this does a couple things to me. Number one, this takes the dark skies concept to the whole county.
Not necessarily. If you look at the proposed amendments, the applicability section very clearly states who it is applicable to. The name change may make it seem as if it's applicable to the whole county, but it is clear in the applicability section that most of the provisions are for the Ogden Valley and only out in western Weber if they've been given bonus density as part of a cluster subdivision.
So this is, you can use this to gain bonus density in a cluster subdivision.
It's one of the items that is required. So if you're going to get bonus density, you have to set aside additional open space. You have to have up to 50% open space to qualify for bonus density. You have to adhere to the Ogden Valley Outdoor Lighting Ordinance. And you also have to install street trees on either side of the right-of-way every 50 feet in order to qualify.
What I said does pretty much hold true. This basically moves the dark skies concept to the whole county.
It could, under certain developments, if they want to go that route, yeah.
Yeah, because, common sense tells you that you're going to want to try to get all the density, the bonus. And so, no question, it heavily incentivizes that.
It does.
Look, I've bought into this standard in the Upper Valley because it's a special place up there and a lot of people wanted it and it's got borders on it and that doesn't bother me at all. that they've chose to do this up there. But down here, I don't know, that bothers me a little. All right, that was the questions I wanted to ask. Thank you.
But just to be clear, unless they applied for cluster under the bonus, that wouldn't apply to everybody.
That's correct. They'd have to specifically seek out that bonus density to then be required to have this night sky lighting.
Right, got it. Okay, additional questions? Comments? All right, let's go to members of the public that would like to talk about the Ogden Valley Outdoor Lighting and Illumination Ordinance. Anybody online or anybody in the chamber?
Is there anybody online who would like to go?
Doesn't look like it.
You're the man.
I'd say you're the wingman, only you got one wing down.
Gonna go around in circles. If you wonder why I've been involved in a lot of the work session calls, and that is, haven't had to be able to do a lot of things, so I've been
Makes sense.
trying to understand how the sausage gets made. You guys work hard in those meetings. Again, Ron Gleason, unincorporated, Huntsville. I've been involved, was involved with the original accreditation of North Fork Park, along with Frank Cumberland and Janet Muir, and continue to be involved on an annual basis doing the readings that we have to do to keep the accreditation, along with the couple events we do every year. Unfortunately going to be canceled this year, but with DWR and with the Ogden Astronomical Society. And that, so it's been a lot of fun. It's a passion of mine, along with astrophotography. Do a lot of night photography up in the valley, and want to protect that. So I'm standing here today asking you commissioners to vote yes for these changes. I believe the changes are minimal at best, and as Scott said, it tightens up the code, takes out some anomalies. I know there was a few things expressed about the enforcement, and I don't have a lot of comments on the enforcement, because I think that's a policy issue coming from the county. If you want to keep it standard across all the ordinances like they're proposing and all that, I can understand that, but I think that's a policy thing that both the Planning Commission, I think you commissioners have to make. Some people say it's harsh. Again, I'm just not in a good position to answer that. The last comment has to do with the Dark Sky Committee. I was the member of the public that made the suggestion of possibly removing staff, and I made that suggestion because the Dark Sky Committee has not been established yet. It was in the ordinance when it was originally passed in 2017, and that committee has not been established. And it was my thought that if a member of the staff was removed from that, possibly that was a barrier for why it hadn't been established, because I would like to see this committee established as soon as possible. I make the parallel to the weed and the junk committee that you put in place, because I think they're very parallel, and from the public standpoint, we can do what's written in the ordinance, but also I think we can do a lot of awareness and a lot of education. And I say we because when you go to establish, I will be applying to be in that committee, because I've met with a number of HOAs, because they're asking, saying, hey, we have things in our CCNRs, but can the county help us enforce these? So we've done some education, we've done some outreach already, and I think this committee can do more of that, and again, create more awareness and more education. Thank you.
So, Ron, just so we're clear,
Yeah.
you're in support of putting a staff member on that committee. Is that correct? Or you're not?
Personally, I don't. If staff has time, it would be great for them to participate. But if it is what has caused the committee not to be created because there is staff is too busy or they think it would be a burden, then I'd be in favor of removing staff.
Okay. So who do you view as in charge of setting that committee up right now?
According to the ordinance, it's the county commissioners.
Okay.
So again, I think the procedure would be very similar to what you did with the weed committee, in that where you went out and solicited people to apply, and then there was some selection criteria process. And as it's written right now, someone from the planning, 2 people from the public, 2 people from the OVBA, and 1 person from Visit Ogden what would make up that committee. And I think that's a good mix. Again, going back to If a planning person, because they're too busy, is what stopped the committee from being formed, then I'd be in favor of removing them.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure that was the reason it hasn't existed, but anyway, we'll address that. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ron. Additional comments, questions?
I have a couple.
Go ahead.
After you, Commissioner, I think you were...
Well, I was just going to say, there's one more thing you haven't done yet. I thought we was going down pretty good, getting most of these done, but obviously there's one that we've missed there.
Yeah. I'll take the blame for that. Okay, Commissioner Harvey.
You know, I don't want this to be viewed as a taking. I've, like both of you, in fact, not as long, but got at least 3 decades of working in the construction industry. You both have a little more than that. I view this as being able to, well, for me, the lighting in itself is an intangible. It's like noise. When my neighbors are up too late and they're playing their music too late at night, it's not you can't touch noise, but you can sure hear it. Even on some of the days, if it's just not respectful, I think, in a neighborhood. And I'd say the same thing at night when there's an awful lot of light. I think the purpose of having lights are to shine down so you have a way to see where you're going, not so that you can light up the sky. I think there are times where you need to light up the sky, like those big searchlights they used to use back in the Second World War. There's purpose for that, but I think the purpose for lighting a home is to beautify or make sure that it stays safe. What I'm getting at here is I think that just involves the direction that I've got from Mr. Grover, from our planning director, is that's how the light is hooded. And the direction the light flows from that, whether it flows out and down or whether it flows up. I like the fact that we have another gem in dark sky. That we actually have one of the places on Earth that's accredited as a place where you can view dark skies. That's another asset to our community. I think it's great. Whether that should be down here, Commissioner, I'm kind of with you on that, but on the flip side, to put a hood on something, it's almost, to me, and to use a plumbing term, it's almost like when I walk into a restroom and I see some of the lavatory P-traps that are wrapped. I don't know the purpose for those wraps. I mean, it's maybe a little more it's a pipe. Does it need a piece of sponge around it? I don't know that it does or not, but for some reason there's some kind of code that makes it have a wrap. And there's probably some legitimate reason, just like there's a legitimate reason to have a hood. So on that, the only last comment I'd have on that too is with what Mr. Gleason brought up. All the successful committees that I've been around usually have someone that's in the process that knows the way to navigate through the governmental agency, whether it's an arena board or a fair board or any other boards that we have here, a weed board. We have our weed guy on there that they can explain. Well, they usually bring a little higher level of expertise because as good as we have so many wonderful volunteers here. Having someone in the field, an expert that does it all day, every day, and is familiar with the samples or the lighting or the construction or whatever it is around here is, I think, is a value, and maybe that employee can learn, or maybe that employee can teach back and forth. It can go both ways, and so I think it adds to our value as a business to have an employee on there. And I think it would add to the effectiveness and efficiency of the committee if that were the case. But I also want to directly tell you, Mr. Gleason, the reason that the committee hasn't been formed is because there is or isn't a person on there. It just hasn't been done. But we will attend to that. But that wasn't of any bearing. But I do feel that there ought to be a representative from the county for our business. It would be good. Thank you, Mr.
I
Chair.
agree, thank you. And I just want to make a comment on this. So I think the reason that we probably waited a couple weeks to get to this item is I actually had some serious questions when I saw this come about, discussions with the Upper Valley Planning Commission with a couple of members. So currently, as we know, we have an ordinance in place. We have that ordinance in place. After reviewing this and suggesting a couple of changes to Mr. Grover, which I know have been made, I think this goes a long way to do away with some unneeded enforcement provisions of that. In my opinion, this is a step forward in private property rights. It allows farmers to do what they do, which is obviously light their yards if they need to. It's business friendly to the extent that we deal with businesses coming in. And I think it helps clarify so there's not as a heavy hand that, again, going back to what we just dealt with our previous action item, where a planning commission could use a heavy hand and stop somebody from a particular construction or project that was within boundaries. So again, I'm in favor of this after reviewing it, making a couple of changes. With that, anybody else? And this hasn't, and again, I applaud Mr. Grover and his staff for listening to me, my concerns, members of the public in Ogden Valley, that made sure that we obviously want dark skies, but we don't want undue regulation.
Exactly.
That's what, and we don't want, as I made the comment in this chamber 2 or 3 years ago, whenever this was passed, that it's not our job to hire a bunch of light police that go out there and enforce this. We don't want that. We don't have the capability. We have more important to put our enforcement people to work on. So I think this goes a long ways to that. So with that.
Comment to that?
Go ahead.
Well, you say you view this as more friendly. On page 2, when it talks about light shielding and direction, number 5, which they're adding, says that the purpose of it is to ensure light does not trespass on neighborhoods and neighboring properties. So are we going to go out there and start deciding if light trespasses on neighboring properties?
Well, I think that's, again, that's in the current ordinance that somebody could make a complaint if it's trespasses on somebody else's property. I think, Mr. Grover, you may want to.
That's that shows an addition. That's line 5.
But that was in another part of that ordinance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's our, thanks for the opportunity to speak and come before you. That's already in the ordinance. This is just clarifying it a bit more. It's basically, we want to be able to make it easy for Iris when she goes out and does code enforcement, that she can just go out and see the source and just make sure that it's not trespassing onto someone else's property.
Okay. So you think that just makes it a little clearer, easier
Right.
to read, huh?
That's, if I can.
Go ahead.
Commissioner, that's my point with the sound.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, as I was sitting, Gage, you said something, it's like a car driving down the road. You know, the car driving down the road lights up the road so you can see where you're headed. It doesn't light up the sky, or it doesn't light up, I mean, you might when you're out hunting jackrabbits or something, you may have the lights going up, but it's still to light the ground up, because you're not hunting rabbits that are flying in the sky. And so it's the same thing. It's just controlling where the light ends up, and that's usually done with a hood. Yeah, I was going to try to make a plumbing reference, but I'm sure you know what I'm saying.
And the reason for changing the name too is that if, for instance, Western Weber does want to start looking at this more in depth, it gives them the opportunity, but right now it's just strictly with cluster subdivisions. It allows, if they want to take advantage of that, then that's a provision that's in there.
And I think, Commissioner Jenkins, to your point, what we have in the current ordinance gives the opportunity for members of the public to call on their neighbor that may not like a particular light on a barn or garage. This clarifies it. Are they actually trespassing? Is that light actually showing on your property or not? Currently, we have people that call in, and I think Rick can, or call some of our staff and say, this neighbor, we need to go out and shoot his lights out because I can see it at certain times of night. I think this gives the ability for staff to say, look, let's clear the cut. Is this trespassing? Is this going on your property or not? If it's not going on your property, then that's life. Get over it. So,
And most of the times when Iris, our code enforcement officer, has reached out to these individuals, if there are violations and things like that, they've been very willing to make those modifications. They just weren't aware. And that education is key. We've tried to do that, but here again, that committee can be part of that education process.
and I'm in favor of that committee getting that established. Probably makes sense.
I like the part of the of this where it talks, you've added low output lighting in there, because I think that greatly enhances the view and the atmosphere around homes, and it's inexpensive, and so I like all that. All that I'm okay with. The only one I question is why. It's not easy to go out there and see if somebody's light is trespassing their property.
And it is a bit of a judgment call, but we didn't
Yeah.
want to start requiring all these different light studies to be done and things like that, because then that requires more money for the applicant to put into. And so we look at the plan, we make sure that they have the shielding and that information on the plans, so that when staff does it, basically it's an easy review, and then when Iris goes out and looks at it, she can see their shielding on there, and that's pretty much the majority of what's been happening. And these changes are more minor. It's not creating additional ones upon that.
Is there another word other than trespass that would be better?
Well, I think the word works. I mean, it says exactly what it is.
Yeah.
No, I think it works. It's just what we wanted to have is something that code enforcement, Iris, could go out and make a decision on, you know, where the light actually had shone, rather than somebody's subjective judgment. Go back to soil studies or light studies that we have currently in ordinance on other areas we just talked about this morning, that makes things a little easier to enforce or not to enforce, and that we can make a clear distinction with members of the public when they call in. Anything else, Rick?
Nope. Thanks.
Okay. Any additional comments? We have anybody on Zoom on this particular issue? Doesn't look like it.
I'll check.
With that, you want to check on that?
Yeah, I was right there. It's just come off.
Not hearing anything from Shelley. Okay, seeing none, let's go on to our next public hearing item. Agenda item, public hearing regarding a proposal to amend the following sections of Weber County Code, sections 101-1-7 and number 108-7, to add a definition of agricultural building, amend the definition of agricultural parcel, and include the provisions for agricultural building exemptions. Mr. Burton.
Hello, Commissioners. The Planning Division is proposing to bring the land use code as it relates to agricultural exempt buildings into compliance with the state code. And there's actually very small changes that I'll go over with you real quick.
Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, under definitions, our current code provides a definition of agricultural parcel. And it explains that the definition needs to be fulfilled in order to qualify for the agricultural building exemption. That definition is that the term agricultural parcel means a parcel of land at least 5 acres in area if vacant, or 5 1/4 acres with a residential dwelling unit. State code actually only requires, if you're in an unincorporated county and in a subdivision, it requires that you have 2 acres. So this would make it easier for people to get agricultural exempt buildings, which is nice, because you don't have to get a full-on building permit that requires engineered plans. So it would make it easier to get an ag exemption under that. We're also adding a definition of agricultural building, just for clarity. So that definition is, the term agricultural building means a structure used solely in conjunction with on-site agricultural use. And then the last change that we're proposing to make is, again, to add some clarity, adding an actual section of our code under agricultural building exemptions. We didn't currently have, we didn't have that. So that section is just one sentence. It states, agricultural buildings are exempt from the permit requirements of the state construction codes, except plumbing, electrical, and mechanical permits may be required when that work is included in the structure. And those are proposed changes that we're making. You've got unanimous recommendations from both planning commissions for approval.
Great. Thank you. Questions, commissioners? Comments?
Appears to me the most important thing there is electrical. It is not exempted.
Correct.
Electrical. Okay.
Yeah, so basically what this does, right now it follows the Greenbelt statute under our ordinance. Somebody that had a 2 or 3 acre, 4 acre site anywhere in the county, they want to put up a hay building, they can do that and still be exempt without having to provide engineered plans. They could go to a Roper building or a Cleary or whatever. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Before, we said 5 acres. You had to have 5 acres. Even if somebody had a farm, maybe 4 acres, they weren't able to get that ag exemption.
Right.
But
This,
now,
this matches the new plan that when we did those farmettes or whatever they call them, the little smaller farms and those things, because to give that exemption that John Ulibarri presented here not long ago. But this goes right along with it.
Yeah, makes things a little easier.
Makes sense.
Okay. Is that it, Mr. Burton?
that's it.
Any additional questions? Anybody that, from members of the public online that would like to comment on this? We warned everybody out. Okay.
Yeah, there's only one other, but we're good.
Good.
Okay. There is a farmer in the gallery here. I thought maybe we'd hear something from him on this.
He's been pretty mute.
Any comments? I don't think we're going to get him up here, Scott. So.
I agree.
Okay. Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn our public hearing and reconvene as a public meeting.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We're now in a public meeting. Action on our public hearing. Let's deal with the first item, request for approval to amend the Weber County Code Sections 108-16 and 110-2 to clarify the Ogden Valley outdoor lighting and illuminating sign allowances as presented in our public hearing. I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Would be Ordinance 8.
Motion to approve Ordinance 8.
Ordinance 8. We have a motion. Chair will second that motion. Madam.
Commissioner Harvey?
Aye.
Commissioner Jenkins?
Can't pass like we do the legislature.
Can't pass.
Aye.
Chair Farrar?
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
I would like to state, the only reason I hesitate there is because it said Ogden Valley in the original one. We've taken that out. And that bothers me just a little. And I don't even know if I should be bothered, but it does. So anyway.
Well, I've always liked the term Ogden Valley, but, you know, that's a personal preference. Okay, next action item, request for approval to amend the following sections of Weber County Code, 101-1-7 and 108-7 to add a definition of agricultural building, amend the definition of agricultural parcel, and include provisions for agricultural building exemptions.
Mr. Chair,
motion?
I'd make a motion that we approve that section of the code.
That's, what resolution is that, or ordinance?
Ordinance 9.
Ordinance 9, Commissioner.
Ordinance 9.
And I think we have a second. And we have a second.
Okay, Commissioner Harvey? Aye. Commissioner Jenkins?
Aye.
Chair Farrar?
Aye, thank you. Motion carries. We have a new ordinance, 8 and 9. Thank you very much. Now we're to our final item, which would be commissioner comments. Not that we've had a lack of commissioner comments today. But now's your opportunity to get your final licks in before next.
So are you saying you think we've talked too much?
No, I like it. No.
Oh, okay.
No, look at this, we've gone.
Yeah, we drove him right out of here.
I figure if we got 15 minutes, that'll be a 2-hour meeting, so.
No,
that's good.
Okay.
It's healthy to have these discussions.
That is.
So I'm never one to postpone debate, discussion. So Commissioner Harvey.
It still's fun working with you, whether it's virtual or in person.
Good to know. Commissioner Jenkins, any comments?
No comments.
Thank you very much. We appreciate, again, those members of the public were here that were on Zoom. I want to take the time to thank our planning staff, members of the commission. We know that their job is not that easy at times, but you know, I know that they're here for the same reason we are, which is to make good decisions for members of the public. So I would hope that they would continue to do that, and that we would continue to do our job to make sure that we are representing private property rights and what we do for this county. With that, I'd entertain a final motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.